Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Perspective. As the 12-day war between Iran and Israel enters a kind of tentative truce, a very delicate truce. We're not sure how long it'll last, but what we've seen over the last couple of weeks has been mayhem and chaos, with America coming in as well with potential destruction of nuclear facilities, so we're told. But even there, we're not sure exactly what's gone on. The American Defense Department is saying something else. They're saying that the damage isn't that much. Ayatollah Khamenei is saying there's not that much damage. And now there's an entire narrative offensive from Donald Trump's office to try and turn the narrative into one which says he succeeded. We don't know what the truth is 100%. What we do know is that as Iran and Israel stand off, Palestine itself continues to be attacked. Palestinians continue to be targeted, and there's no change on that front. In today's show, I've got two really good guests which are going to be able to navigate both of these issues because they now seem to be inexorably linked. The widening of the war seems to be something that is very much on the cards again. But how does it affect Iranians? How does it affect Palestinians? And how does it affect Israelis? And even more to the point, how does it affect the Jewish diaspora, which much of it, which is actually turning against Israel itself? In the studio, I have Mike Cushman, who's a co-founder of Jewish Voice for Labour. And we've also got joining us online our good friend Stephen Bell from Stop the War campaign. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Happy to be here.
And welcome, Mike. So let me start with you, Stephen, with the overall geopolitical analysis, and then we'll focus on how it's impacting all the various parties. But what do you make of what's happened? You know, there's been very unprecedented action that's gone on, and we're now at some kind of impasse. But give us your overview of how you think it's been going so far between these protagonists.
Well, I think that the source of the war against Iran is to be found in the response of the United States government to being stalemated in Ukraine. Immediately, this meant that they doubled down on the Israeli actions against the Palestinians. And we've seen the most horrific genocide broadcast around the world, while publicly supported by most Western governments. The fact that they've been able to get away with that in defiance of all elements of international law, not to speak of morality, means that the Israeli offensive has been extended into Lebanon, into regime change in Syria, attacks upon Yemen, all of which have effectively been supported by Western governments. It is then not surprising that Israel, Netanyahu, after surviving a no confidence vote, decides upon attacking his Iran, a war which he has sought for nearly 30 years now. And the fact that the US government supported this is evident in the action of the US government taking direct part in military assault upon Iranian soil. And I think that it is that dynamic that has suffered a couple of setbacks. Firstly, in Yemen, when Trump had to pull the plug on an unlimited offensive. And here, essentially, Trump has attempted to save Israel, because despite major tactical successes in the first part of the 12-day war, it was evident that the Iranian retaliation was being very effective in that Israel was much more vulnerable than the United States would like to have seen. Consequently, the direct intervention by Trump. Now, I think, as you say, this is an uneasy truce. It looks like the first round of continuing action. And the arguments about what has happened from the position of Trump's position of totally destroyed or obliterated Iran's nuclear program, the Israel claiming that Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon has been set back by many years, completely confounds all other estimates, whether that was, as you say, the US intelligence, the IAEA's assessment on last Sunday that there was no rise in off-site radiation, and the Financial Times published a report 2 hours ago of reports prepared for the EU governments, which indicate that, firstly, the enriched uranium stockpile remains largely intact, and secondly, that while Fordow suffered extensive damages, it's not faced full structural destruction. So we don't know precisely. We have to navigate through this. But what's clear is that the dynamics of the US confronting Iran have received a setback, and it will be difficult for Trump to simply reopen a war. But inevitably there will be a second chapter in it. Who knows how long it will be?
In terms of successes and failures, I mean, what I can pick up is certainly that the key target was to disable Iran's nuclear development program. It's pretty clear, even before that happened, that those sites, facilities, which were in the knowledge of Israel and America, weren't necessarily all of what was there, because it's emerging that there was something like 400 pounds of nuclear material, I think developed to 60%, I believe, which they don't know anything about now. So Iran still has material to make a nuclear weapon, should they desire. They don't guarantee that they've hit all of Iran's nuclear facilities, and they also don't guarantee that the knowledge base that Iran has to make those that weapon, if they chose to, it hasn't been eradicated from Iran. That tells me that there's a kind of excuse for Israel to go at it again and to lobby for more bombing, more attacks. It also, from Trump's point of view, I mean, he needs to sell a victory, that he had a quick victory, and as a peacemaker, he's managed to bring things together. So there's a lot of politics obviously going on around this. So he's not going to admit whether these facilities have really been obliterated, as he says, or not in reality, I guess. And of course, he can also use the excuse that later, if they find out that things aren't the way they wanted them to be, that he could also initiate a further set of actions against Iran. So actually, they've all kind of left themselves open to the option of more war. But I'm going to bring in Mike on this. Mike, you've been battling as part of Jewish Voices for Labour against war in that area, against the genocide particularly. But of course, what happened between Iran and Israel over the last 2 weeks took the attention away, it could be argued, from the plight of the Palestinians. Have you been focusing on the war, or did you continue with your concentration on the genocide? Because people have been killed trying to collect food in Gaza.
I mean, obviously, our biggest concern is a continuing and intensifying genocide. But Israel's criminal actions in Iran have to be a concern to us and to everybody. Why the Israelis claimed they were attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, but in order to do that, they bombed many civilian residential areas. They have consistently breached international law by extrajudicial killing. Now, there is terrorism under any definition of the act to go into another country and kill people is not an act of war, unless you're actually at war. It's an act of terrorism. And their inability to attack Iran's nuclear facilities to any effective extent meant that they had to get the Americans to join in their illegal activity, rather than the Americans just supplying all the weapons in order for Israel to do it.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons they want to do that is to distract attention from Gaza. And to a depressing extent, they succeeded. So we had an urgent necessity to keep the focus on Gaza. We see, even today, Ismail Ben-Gvir, who, even by Israeli standards, is an extremist, he's the Minister of National Security, saying that Israel must halt even the very limited amount of food and supplies going into Gaza. He wants to starve Gaza totally. It's a concentration camp where there is no food going in, where there's no baby formula. Babies are dying because Israel is not allowing just very basic supplies. What country kills babies as an act of policy? And the answer is Israel.
Well, you talk about babies, and they seem to use the same playbook in the illegal violation of Iran's sovereignty through the bombing they initiated, that surprise attack. And right away, it was clear that they weren't just targeting military setups or nuclear sites. Families were being wiped out. I think the first building I heard that went down was maybe like something like 70 or 80 people died, and half of them were children and women, at least 10 kids, at least I remember. And then the list continued. Ever since then, it's almost like they've made baby killing and civilian killing a norm. Contrasting that, I mean, I have to be sort of frank about it, contrasting that with the way Iran responded, it's very clear that they were going for military targets. And yes, Israelis have been killed, but it seems as though there too, what we've got is THAAD missile, anti-missile systems, the Arrow sling and the Iron Dome seem to be operating and based right in the middle of civilian territory. So they've been talking about human shields and Hamas and etc. using human shields in Palestine. But it was quite clear that even a lot of the Mossad intelligence bases, the military bases, were located right next to hospitals. In fact, there was one explosion which hit I think an intelligence site, and the fallout for it hit a hospital, and up went the hue and cry that Iran has hit a hospital, whereas in reality it was a kind of a collateral damage. Now, to me, this idea of changing and challenging Geneva Convention or any humanitarian rule of law in war even is now just a precedent that they've set. What was your reaction when you saw the same playbook going on in Tehran or around Iran? How did you react to that?
I mean, sorry, when you say the attack on civilian areas, you mean the same playbook?
Yes.
I mean, with horror, I mean, I deplore killing. You know, I don't celebrate any deaths at all. I find deaths of soldiers attacking civilians easier to live with than the killing of the civilians by the soldiers. I mean, that's the calculus. But the hypocrisy of the Israeli response to a missile landing on a hospital in Tel Aviv, as though this had never happened before, as though every single hospital in Gaza had not been systematically destroyed, that healthcare for a population which has the normal health needs as well as the disastrous wounds and injuries from war, and the hypocrisy of their response about, oh, it's horrible, they've attacked one of our hospitals, oh, this is outrageous.
There was a
Bring in
victim.
the International Criminal Court, bring in the cops. No, I mean, it made me sick, that response.
It was a kind of a victim's response, which again is an allegation that is fired at the Israeli fraternity. Stephen, your reaction to the way Israel went around bombing Iran, and then the international community and the rules around the international, regulations for war. I mean, what was your thought on the way that the world react to it, the world's institutions, for a start?
Well, I think that the institutions, if we're talking, say, European governments, I think it was absolutely dreadful. The EU and the British government's response essentially defended both the Israeli action and the US actions, despite the fact that they're in breach of the UN Charter, in breach of the Geneva Convention, and of course, the non-proliferation treaty by attacking nuclear sites. But none of that was raised by all of these guardians of the public morality. And in terms of what we are witnessing now, we are witnessing the post-Gaza world. What the US has done and allowed to be done in Gaza is now offered to the rest of the world if you don't buckle down to the priorities of the US imperialism. And so it is shocking, but it's shocking that people are becoming accustomed to the ideas of attacking hospitals, attacking children, the end of any multilateral international cooperation. Instead, it's all realpolitik, military action, and a world without law. All the Geneva Conventions can be put aside, all the discussions around them, because what matters is the continued dominance of the US, not a international rules-based order. That's secondary. It's nice if you can keep it, but the United States government obviously don't think they can keep it. Therefore, that can go because US dominance has to remain. And given the fact that the US economy continues to decline relative to the global south, and in particular to the growth of China, that's the source of such belligerence, and such belligerence utilizing military action over any issues of diplomacy or international law and so on. That is what we are witnessing. The post-Gaza world is offering Gaza for the rest of the world. That's what the United States is offering, and that is what we have to face up to. Our responsibilities in the anti-war movement and in the progressive movement generally are increasing by the day.
Russia, I read today, had some interesting reactions. I think they were sitting opposite the Israelis on the UN Security Council after all this peace broke out, or the truce broke out, the ceasefire, whatever we want to call it. And the Russians made some very interesting statements which carry some weight as well. They said, we're surprised that Israel sits before us around this issue, because they're not even a party to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, as owners of at least 90 nuclear weapons, if not 400. That's the estimate. You can take your pick between that. The Russians said, we're surprised that Israel is sitting here, given that they're not even signing up for the NPT and don't even admit to having these weapons. Then they said that they would continue to give Iran support in building their nuclear capacity. Clearly, they mean in a peaceful sense, for industrial purposes and not weapons grade. But they said, I think the final thing was that they weighed in with the idea that Iran, has the right to that kind of banning IAEA. That's an interesting development, because the IAEA, of course, has been given carte blanche by Iran to inspect its sites previously. But there have been espionage reports from the Iranian intelligence, which have come into their hands, exposing IAEA links to passing on information to Israel and others, therefore basically compromising Iranian security around those nuclear plants, which then, of course, implicates the IAEA. And now we're in this strange situation where Donald Trump and Israel have managed to get Iran to move away from any agreement, the JCPOA or any other kind of negotiation that they were doing while all this planning was going on to bomb Iran within Israel. But they've also now managed to probably persuade Iran not to let the IAEA come in and inspect anything, so they could go secretly and do what they want anyway. So these are more indications. Do you see that as a success for the Americans and the Israelis in achieving this?
No, I think it's an expression of the resilience of the Iranian people, that they're not simply going to sort of accept what's happened and continue as though the actions of the IAEA were without fault. They've already lodged a formal complaint with the UN Secretary General and with the UN Security Council. And yesterday, the Iranian Parliament carried a bill for withdrawal from the IAEA. I understand the Guardian Council endorsed it today, and therefore it is law. They will withdraw. They will cease involvement. And what is to be expected in these circumstances? In terms of the going forward, they're going to obviously, why should they trust the IAEA? You have a position where the conventional hypocrisy is that the only people breaking international agreements are the Iranians. Well, that's not true. I mean, on the question of the JCPOA, we know perfectly well that the US withdrew, but the Europeans had a catastrophic position. They didn't even do what they did on Cuba when they got waivers from the United States to protect European trade with Cuba. They didn't do that on Iran. They allowed the Iranian economic relations with Europe to be destroyed by Trump's withdrawal. And now the same powers, the E3 powers, Britain, Germany, and France, are threatening Iran with snapback sanctions, despite the fact that they basically withdrew their involvement with the JCPOA. They failed to uphold their end, but they're insisting Iran is now vulnerable to snapback sanctions. So I think that you are talking about a position where the Iranians have been forced to start to work outside of the framework of multilateral institutions, which are being gutted by the United States and their European allies. The future will be very difficult and unstable if this is continued, and above all, if there is no response from the European governments, the British government, and so on. If they continue simply to tail behind everything that the United States is doing, then their role will simply be that of subcontractors of US foreign policy in the region, and that would be a completely difficult thing. When you see Chancellor Walz from Germany is talking in terms of that Israel is doing our dirty work, that's where we're going. A future with wars without laws and morals. That's what these people are promising.
Well, what I also noticed, and I'll come to you on this, Mike, but the credibility of Israel, there was a lot of what would be described as Hasbara propaganda, which made Israel look the innocent victim in West Asia for many decades. So that was a line that was given, and it was very successful. It was backed by Western media and by Western governments. The genocide that's gone on for the last 18 months, 19 months, seems to have shattered a lot of that. People seem to be waking up all over the place in all levels of society. The Jewish youngsters in America, for instance, 60% of them are saying they don't even support Israel anymore in any way, shape or form. The same kind of statistics come when you talk about the sort of people that you've been appealing to here in the West. So I'm wondering whether an aggressive war on Iran, where again it looks very clearly like Israel is the kind of instigator and the troublemaker, has made them even less popular. Given also that we were on the precipice of the Hormuz Straits being shut down. The Hormuz Straits being the 20% of the world's energy resources coming out of there. And if Israel was willing to have the Hormuz Straits shut down, that means it wants the entire world to basically suffer for whatever their issues are there. Our cost of living would go through the roof. Migration, or bad as it is already, would become 5 times worse, arguably. The markets would crash. There would be, I think, an entire chaos descending globally. That makes your job in terms of getting the public to recognize the seriousness of this a little easier, perhaps. Do you think it's going to get you more people backing your campaigns here?
I think it's difficult. I mean, okay, if the Straits of Hormuz closed, then everything's very different. But Iran is deeply unpopular in this country, and therefore Israel attacking Iran doesn't actually affect the calculus very much at all.
Okay.
It's Israel's attack on Gaza that is changing minds. I mean, I have no love for the Iranian regime. I mean, the Women, Life, Freedom was a wonderful and encouraging initiative. But one has to separate what one thinks about the Iranian regime from Israel's attack on Iran. And Israel's attack on Iran is criminal and disastrous, whatever one thinks about Khomeini. And I have no great love for him. But I mean, what I've seen over a long period is Israel does outrageous things, like it invaded Lebanon, and support for Israel dipped very strongly. It recovered, but not to the extent it was before. It invaded Lebanon again, support dipped, and it recovered a bit. Then it attacked Gaza in 2008. Support dipped, and it recovered, but every time it's on a curve that's going down and down and down. But none of those had a fraction of the effect of the Gaza genocide, which has changed altogether. Last weekend, I was in Vienna for a International Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress. There were several hundred Jews there, mainly from Europe, but from outside Europe as well. Some of them were long in the tooth like me, who have been opposing Israel for many years. But there are a lot of younger people there who I talked to who said 2 years ago they would have called themselves a Zionist, and they no longer do. And, you know, we are part, I mean, Jewish Voice for Labour, I mean, I think we're quite effective on our own, but we're only part of, in this country, the Jewish Bloc for Palestine, and internationally of Global Jews for Palestine. You know, we have comrades across the world who are working together to challenge the narrative that Netanyahu says he speaks for Jews, to break down the narrative that bodies like, in this country, the Board of Deputies speaks for the Jewish community. The Board of Deputies doesn't even speak for its own members. 36 of its members wrote not a bad letter, but not a strikingly aggressive letter, deploring what Israel was doing. The Board of Deputies hierarchy suspended them. It's now expelled 5 of them. So I expect them to attack me, but they're turning on their own. This has been going on longer in America. The American Jewish community is much bigger than ours. It's much more self-confident and therefore much more able to split and argue among itself. The UK Jewish community, although it's relatively large compared with other ones in Europe, still is quite small, very inward-looking, and is very reluctant to argue in public. That is changing. Before 9th of October, 7th of October, so I can't get my dates right now.
Sure.
There was a Jewish bloc on Palestine demonstrations. It was a couple of dozen people of my generation who would assemble outside Cafe Nero and join the march. Now, it is not just people like me. It's all age groups. It's observant Jews as well as secular Jews, Jews from all sorts of backgrounds, never less than several hundred, sometimes a couple of thousands. Now, we couldn't have imagined this on October the 6th.
Yeah.
I mean, tragedy that thousands and thousands and thousands of Gazans have to die to show other Jews what the state that they have been supporting for these years is capable of.
Well, for seasoned campaigners like yourself, clearly things have at least taken a turn for the positive in terms of awareness. Stephen, coming to the end of our show, so just concluding remarks really, Ayatollah Khamenei hasn't been more popular. And I take on board what Mike said about reservations that some people in the West have about Iranian women. But again, having been to around 2 or 3 times myself, I have to say that Iranian women are now 95% fully educated. Some of the ones who were firing and controlling the missiles that were landing on Israel were majority women, from what I understand. So I think there is a little bit of an exaggeration that goes on about the plight of women in Iran. I could also cite MI6 operations to create psyops in Iran to create regime change, which is exactly what Israel and America have been trying to do just now as well. These are all counter-arguments for another show, perhaps. But what I'm interested in is really the collective sentiment around the world for really changing the course of it almost seems like an oligarchical obsession with war and for plunder and power. Do you see any real grassroots movement can actually genuinely challenge the powers that be? And are we at that point where the Stop the War movement, or the people who want peace, which is now transcending all ethnicities, all religions? Of course, we have Jews here with us, we're Christians, Muslims. Do you think there's a chance that this movement can win, or are we just barking in the air, in the wind again?
The ultimate success is based, first of all, on the resistance of the people of the global south themselves. I mean, the Palestinians have indicated no desire to go quietly into oblivion. They intend to remain, and they will remain while they hold that desire. Equally, it's obvious that the impact of the assault upon Iran has been to unify the people of Iran. Certainly, all the indications are there is a mobilization behind the government in the face of this aggression. So the resistance of the oppressed people themselves is the first precondition, and it's the most important one. But the role of the international solidarity is very important insofar as that we put pressure upon those who are oppressing the Iranians, those who are oppressing the Palestinians. Even if we can't stay their hand at this point in time, we can make it difficult. And we can make the political cost of what they do difficult. And it is that combination, that patience, which we've seen, for instance, in the victories of the Vietnamese people, in the victories of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. This is the struggle around Palestine is the contemporary expression of similar historical experiences. And all the indications are, despite the huge weight and wealth of the imperialist powers, that they remain unconvincing, even to their own people. The US opinion poll, the YouGov poll shortly after Trump's bombing, indicated that 85% of Americans polled were against a war with Iran. Nor is there any suggestion that Iranian Americans are somehow overwhelmingly for war, despite what the so-called son of the last Shah is saying. The Iranian American Council polled Iranian Americans and found out 53% oppose US military action against Iran, and 66% oppose Trump's visa ban on Iranians. Equally, in this country, there's no indication that what the British government response on Iran has been accepted. The YouGov poll indicates that those who believe that the British government has handled the war issue on Iran well or very well is 22%. Those who believe it is badly or very badly is 44%, twice as many. So despite all their great power, the fact is the popular movement, and in line with the popular opinion throughout the majority of the world, is with the Palestinians and with the Iranians against these assaults.
Thank you, Stephen. Some facts and figures there to get us beyond the emotions of the issue. But the performance of Keir Starmer's come up again. You've been, a heavy member of the Labour Party. Jewish Voices of Labour has been active. Do you think, Mike, you're satisfied with Starmer's response, Keir Starmer's response? He's militarising Britain. It's quite clear that he's buying into this Trump-led push for maybe 5% of our budget going towards the military. That's the talk that I'm hearing. I'm hearing about conscription possibilities coming back. I'm hearing about saber rattling against the Russians. And it's almost like the Americans have taken up the saber rattling in the Middle East, while Britain and the Europeans have taken it up, of course, against Russia. And at the same time, they're playing the opposite role to each other, with the Americans playing peacemaker in Europe and being the aggressor, I would say, still in West Asia. Do you think there's a sort of tag game going on, and these guys are just committed to the idea of belligerent imperialist power games through military saber rattling?
First thing to say is Jewish Voice for Labour was set up to support the Corbyn project when there was a chance of producing a Labour Party in this country that represented the mass of the people of this country, and not to be an adjunct of the Conservative Party. Since then, obviously, the Labour Party has gone to the bad. One consequence is that most of the executive of Jewish Voice for Labour has been expelled. I've been expelled. And all but one of the others have left in disgust.
On what grounds were you expelled?
Supporting anti-Semitic organisations, of course.
As a Jew?
As a Jew. But we have documented at least 60 Jews who have been expelled from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. Sorry, the way you combat anti-Semitism is by attacking Jews. It's obvious. But I'm not so worried about us. We're big boys and girls. We'll survive. What I am worried about, just picking up on the last thing, is yesterday's announcement about buying F-35s from America to carry American tactical nuclear weapons. I don't know against who. And this is an independent nuclear deterrent? It's madness. It's just carrying American bombs for Americans, which cannot be used except under American rules and with American permission. Even if you believed in an independent nuclear deterrent, and I haven't since I learned how to brush my own teeth, then it's not an independent nuclear deterrent. It's just tailing the Americans. But the other thing they've done in the last few days is Yvette Cooper's promise, it's not more than a threat, it's a promise to prescribe Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation. Can I just read something to you?
Yes, sure.
The UK section of the International Commission of Jurists, this is people way above my pay grade, say, there is no established definition of terrorism under international law. Instead, there is a great deal of debate over which actions are terrorist and which are acts of legitimate resistance against oppressive governments. Regardless of the failure to agree on a broader definition, there is an overwhelming consensus that terrorism involves the use of threat of violence against civilians for a political purpose. Nothing that Palestine Action has done has been a threat of violence against civilians for any purpose, political or otherwise. Now, in 2000, under a previous Labour government, they radically extended what anyone would understand as terrorism to include serious damage to property, serious risk to the health and safety of the public or a section of the public, seriously to interfere with or seriously disrupting an electronic system. This is Orwellian. This is redefinition of language. I mean, I love the English language. I hate it when people change the meaning of words, especially when they do it by law for overtly political purposes. I mean, we have to work out why they are doing this. Now, I can come up with 5 reasons. One, they're stupid, but we'll go past that one.
Right.
The first is to deflect attention from the massive failure to protect their own airport, military bases from people on scooters coming in to spray paint. This is a massive failure of their security systems. So rather than talk about their failure to defend their own planes, let's cast these people as terrorists.
Sure.
The second is to prescribe a group, members who are prepared to risk lengthy prison sentences for non-terrorist action. I mean, they're obviously being charged with criminal damage against UK arms manufacturers who have actively assisted Israel's genocidal campaign. Opposing genocide is not terrorism. Complicity in genocide, on the other hand, is a crime under international law. Thirdly, juries have been acquitting Palestine Action members, seeing their actions as proportionate in attempting to prevent more serious crimes. The government probably believe that if they charge people with terrorism, juries will be less willing to acquit. So the facts don't change. It's still the same offence, still people doing the same thing, but they think the juries will be intimidated by the T word,
The counter-terrorism.
into banging people up. Fourthly, it's a signal to try to scare off the mass movement of British people who oppose genocide and oppose Israel's actions. And we have to work out what extent. It now gets to a stage where if I say I support Palestine Action, or it's not defence yet, because they haven't laid down the order, but if I say it in 2 weeks' time, I am liable to up to 14 years in prison.
Goodness me.
Now, what we have to have is an I am Spartacus. Everyone saying, I support Palestine Action. They cannot imprison the whole lot of us. But in the interim, I mean, I got a WhatsApp from my MP's office last night saying, Mike, send us a message about Palestine Action if you want, but we are so flooded out with complaints about the government's action. She's a Labour MP.
Sure.
Of course. We're so flooded out already with complaints about the action that we cannot deal with them. I mean, so this is an MP, and this is not just happening in my MP's office. It's happening in MP's offices up and down the country. There is massive opposition to what this government is doing. You know, when the lead letter in The Guardian is from an ex-chief constable that lays it on the line about how this is an abuse of law. I'm not a chief constable, but if he can see it, I can see it. This is wrong, and we have to be opposing it. This is what fascist governments do. Fascist governments outlaw legitimate protest to protect their position. But it's not even just protect their position, it's to protect the position of a terrorist state 3,000 miles away.
Israel.
Israel. Why? I mean, the problem is the system of international law is near collapse. But it is clear that Keir Starmer and all his acolytes are guilty of complicity in genocide, complicity in international crimes, and they should not be going to Hague for a jolly with the other NATO members. They should be going to Hague to be banged up, pending trial for the most serious offences in the world.
Well, some powerful words there. Stephen, would you agree with that? And what I'd also like to bring in is this idea of resistance. You know, the days of peaceful protests, writing letters, marking down petitions, all of these things have gone on, and you've been in that business of, you know, peacefully protesting. But it seems even that isn't acceptable now. It's under all sorts of harassment. Ayatollah Khamenei and the Iranians made made protests against Israeli actions. The world leaders have made protests against the actions of Israel in Gaza for 19 months to no avail. The UN seems to have been powerless. The ICC, the ICJ, it seems that all of our international tools have been powerless to prevent this for whatever reason. But I'm questioning also, I mean, right at the first outset, we were told that the H word, the H group, wasn't allowed to do what they did, which was on October the 7th, attack Israel. And of course, we were told that on the one hand, that was an act of terror, which was heinous and sort of worthy of the kind of follow-up genocide that's gone on every day. But also, we're told that the Palestinians generally don't really have the right to armed resistance, yet the international law tells us that it's quite the opposite. Iran, if it responds militarily, is also frowned upon. You know, everybody was asking Iran to de-escalate when the war had started from Israel, and the condemnations of Israel were very, very muted, especially from what I would describe as the Anglo-Zionist Western powers. What is this kind of hypocrisy that's going on, and what is this powerlessness? And at what stage does peaceful protest end? Palestine Action, arguably, are also part of that. That they got fed up doing peaceful protests and went to the next level with actual action, which turns out to be now potentially terrorist action, or, you know, at the least criminal, according to the government. Where are we in terms of our rights to protest, and to what extent are we allowed to go?
I agree with Mike that the situation is very serious, a very serious attack upon civil and democratic rights, alongside Palestinian action, which is outrageous move by the Home Secretary and British government. We have leaders of both the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the Stop the War Coalition in court on July the 7th for taking part in a peaceful demonstration. This is the offensive because they've lost the argument, and we have to continue to make the argument. The sad facts of the world are that political power emerges from the barrel of a gun, and they are able to get away with imposing this horrifying slaughter in West Asia and in Palestine in particular, exactly because they have the guns, they have the army, they have the navies. And I think the size of this problem, we can't ever underestimate it. The new Harvard study by Yaakov Garb, a Israeli professor, found, based on the IDF's own population estimates, that the population of Gaza has reduced from 2.22 million prior to the conflict to 1.85 million today. That's a loss of just under 400,000 Palestinians. Now, this has been enabled, defended, and assisted by the governments of the United States, Britain, Europe, and so on. If you are going to carry through such a genocide, then you are very vulnerable to those pointing to your alleged democratic credentials and so on. And that is why they are becoming so consistent, because this is happening in the United States, it's happening in Europe as well, in crushing down on the solidarity movement. That will not prevent us from continuing any more than the weapons that they have unleashed with such horror upon the Palestinians will prevent the Palestinians from continuing to defend themselves.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen Bell from Stop the War Campaign, and thank you very much, Mike Cushman from Jewish Voices.
Can I do a call out? I mean,
sure.
Stephen mentioned the trial of Chris Nynam and Ben Jamal for attempting to walk across Trafalgar Square. They are up in court on Monday the 7th of July, and there is a call for a rally outside the City of London Magistrates Court, which is near Bank Station, from 9 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of July to show our support for Chris and Ben, who were absolutely doing nothing wrong. They were set up in a trap by the police. They walked across Trafalgar Square and walked into the police trap. It was designed to do that. It was not designed to protect public order, and we have to show that Chris and Ben, that we are with them.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mike Cushman. And I think it's clear to me and clear to us, certainly the number of witnesses who are telling of the crimes, really, of the state now against the ordinary people in terms of their liberty to speak and say what they want, is being still nonetheless challenged. It's not stopping these protests. People are all around the world becoming more and more vociferous. I think it's becoming increasingly clear who is on the wrong side of history, who is backing genocide, and who is actually being humanitarian, civilized, and trying to stop unnecessary killing, particularly in the fields of Gaza, but now, of course, Iran too. And the West has, I think the Western establishment has to think carefully, because the Islamic Republic of Iran is garnering an awful lot of support since this 12-day war. The mood across the Muslim world and generally is very much shifting towards the rights of the Islamic Republic of Iran and towards the rights of perhaps those people who are regarded as oppressed, whether they're in Yemen, Iraq, or otherwise. I think people are just fed up of this kind of forever wars inflicted on them, especially in that region. And now it's got to the point where I think people are also recognizing that we're only a step away from nuclear weapons and the Samson option, which Israel famously has in its stockpile ready. And of course, the destruction of the Hormuz Straits, combined with the destruction of almost all the oil refineries around the Gulf region, potentially, as being something which is no longer a matter just for Israel and Iran or Israel and Gaza. It's now something which would affect China, Russia, and the Western world. Nobody is going to be spared from the economic and other meltdown and chaos that would ensue this. So I think there's every reason for the protest groups here in Britain to take heart and continue the struggle. And certainly around the rest of the world, this needs to be a battle of the people, I think, against those greedy establishment people who really seem to have disregard for their own population's views and are pressing ahead with war at the cost of basically the lives of everybody around the world. Thank you to my guests once again for joining the show. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel so that we can get more of these justice voices out as far as possible so that people wake up. That's our purpose at the moment. Thank you very much for watching. Do join us for the next.